Thank you so much.
Well, everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. My name is Bobby Donaldson. I'm a professor of history at the University of South Carolina and the lead scholar for the project Columbia SC 63, Our Story Matters, and a member of the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission. On behalf of all our colleagues, we want to welcome you to the home of Bishop F.C. James. This is a historic day and a historic moment to recognize a legendary and historic figure. So we thank you for being here to honor a young man who was born in Prosperity, South Carolina in 1922, who is a proud 98 years old. And so today we gather to celebrate and honor Bishop James. If we began today to tell you his story, we'd be here till tomorrow. So we will not do that today, but there's an extraordinary history to be told. We have a number of people who are part of the Bishop James Circle who will offer brief words of welcome. We'll begin on behalf of the City of Columbia and Mayor Steve Benjamin to invite Chief Skip Holbrook to come forward with a statement.
Thank you. Bishop James, this is Skip Holbrook, Columbia Police Department, and I'm here on behalf of our mayor and city manager and grateful citizens of Columbia, and it's my honor to read a proclamation to you. A proclamation of July 23rd as Bishop Frederick Calhoun James Day. Whereas Bishop James continued a career in ministry and activism until he was 98 years old, and has led an extraordinary career as a minister, educator, and civil rights advocate. As a theologian, advocate for fair and decent housing, prominent of civil rights, political leader, and public servant. And whereas Bishop James was born in 1922 in Prosperity and served the African American Methodist Episcopal Church for more than 70 years in the United States and South Africa. He has also served on the White House and State Department advisory boards, and he was invited dignitary at the signing of the Voting Rights Act on August 6, 1965. In 2003, he received South Carolina's highest honor, the Order of Palmetto, for his significant contributions to the state. And as a champion of civil rights, he also became a community and state social and political action leader. In 1960, he was elected consultant and director of social action of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and formed a close relationship with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In 1963, he became president of the effective Sumter movement of Sumter and historic chapter in South Carolina civil rights. And Bishop James was assigned in 1976 as bishop in Arkansas and Oklahoma and formed a lifelong friendship with then State Attorney General Bill Clinton. In 1994, he was selected by President Clinton as an official member of the delegation to attend the inauguration of South African President Nelson Mandela, and in 1988, he was again chosen to accompany President and Mrs. Clinton on an official visit to South Africa. Bishop James will receive the Leon Love Lifetime Achievement Award from the South Carolina African American Heritage Foundation in Columbia SC 63. Our story matters in a ceremony on July 23rd that we're here today. Therefore, I, Stephen K. Benjamin, Mayor of City of Columbia, do hereby proclaim July 23rd to be Bishop Frederick Calhoun James Day. Congratulations, sir.
We're also pleased to have today, just show his hand, Sheriff Leon Lott from Richland County. To offer remarks on behalf of his alma mater, I'm very pleased to have Dr. Ernest McNeely, the president of Allen University. Bishop James is a proud 1943 graduate of Allen University.
Bishop, I had an opportunity to come to know Bishop James indirectly. Shortly after my arrival in Columbia, the chairman of the board, Bishop Green, inquired about the possibility of having a seminary, a graduate seminary, And someone said to me, well, you know, the last head of the seminary lives right here in town. And so I sought out Bishop James, not as a former bishop of the church, because I was new, but I had the most extraordinary conversation with him, a person of great vision and wisdom, and very reflective of what AME education was all about and is all about. And certainly those of you who've been in town for a while will know that the result of that conversation was that his name has now been rightly restored to the campus, both in terms of James Plaza and the James Center. He is quintessentially what Allen University is about. And it has been my great honor to get to know him and to see him on the campus for all of our events. And certainly we congratulate you, sir, on this day.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. McNeely. In 1945, a young minister named Frederick Calhoun James became the pastor of the Friendship AME Church. And so now for over 75 years, he's been in the pulpit preaching the gospel. Today, on behalf of Bishop Samuel Green, we're very pleased to have presiding elder Rosalind Coleman, who will come and offer remarks on behalf of the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Greetings to all of you. On behalf of Bishop Samuel Lawrence Green Sr. and the members of the 7th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, it is an honor for me to salute you, Bishop Frederick Calhoun James, for your scholarship, for your leadership in the community as well as the church, and for the contributions that you have made to African American civil rights. The African Methodist Episcopal Church and the community at large in the state of South Carolina as well as beyond, we are proud of you and your lifelong partner, our dear retired Supervisor Dr. Theresa Gregg James. God continue to bless both of you.
Thank you so much, Presiding Elder.
Thank you, Presiding Elder Coleman.
Presiding Elder of the Columbia District.
So the best decision Frederick Calhoun James made actually occurred in 1944, where he married a college classmate named Theresa Gregg. So you do the math. How long have they been married? 76 years, and she's still standing with him today. So please salute her as well. So today we come to honor Bishop James for a number of accolades. He has stood with us. He stood with us in 1961 when he welcomed freedom riders to Sumter. He stood with us in 1963 at the March on Washington. He stood with us in 1964 joining Dr. King in signing the Civil Rights Bill. He stood with us in 1965 when he marched from Selma to Montgomery, setting the stage for the Voting Rights Bill, where we mark the 55th anniversary this summer. So there's a lot to celebrate and recognize in the long journey. So as we thought about someone worthy of such an award, it did not take long to reflect on the life of Bishop James. And so to offer the Leon Love Lifetime Achievement Award, I invite my colleague, compatriot Janie Harriet, who is the chairman of the board and the executive director of the South Carolina African American History Foundation.
Thank you, Bobby. I am so honored to be here today to represent the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission and to pay tribute to Bishop James. We've had a lot going on in the last few months, And just this week, we've been paying tribute to 2 additional civil rights giants. But we've got one right here in our neighborhood that we can talk about, that we can look at, and that we can honor. Bishop James, I'm in tears just thinking how great it is that when you marched across the bridge, when you stood for the Voting Rights Act, it was for all of us, not just African Americans, but for all Americans. So today, I am honored to present you the Leon A. Love Lifetime Achievement Award. Just a word about Leon Love. Leon Love and I met sitting in a conference room at the State House in South Carolina. He quickly became a member of the African American Heritage Commission and served as chair for a number of years. Leon passed on in 2016, and we thought it appropriate that we name a Lifetime Achievement Award to someone who had served with us. And we think it more than appropriate that we give you the Lifetime Achievement Award for your lifetime of serving not only the African American community, not only South Carolina, not only the United States, but the world. So I present this award to you on behalf of the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission. Thank you for your service.
Thank you so very much. Behind this mask, I got a smile that wide.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harriet. If you go on YouTube and you search Martin Luther King Jr. in King Street, South Carolina, you will see a short video of Dr. King engaged in a speech called March on Ballot Boxes, where he talks about the critical value of voting in 1966. But if you look beyond Dr. King on the backstage, the loudest voice that day responding to Dr. King was a young preacher named Frederick Calhoun James. Today I want to acknowledge and recognize that young preacher who is still on the battlefield for civil rights and social justice. So the next voice you'll hear is Bishop Frederick Calhoun James.
Thank you so much to this scholar of scholars and this very, very special person who just handed me this telephone. Just handed me this microphone, rather. Thank you very much. I really want to call attention to page 176, for as we celebrate the life and the legacy of John Lewis, we were there in Southern Africa on a special mission at that time, and it's chronicled there on page 176 in my book, Forward in Faith. The mission that we were on was in the Clinton administration's representation of the delegation to the Nelson Mandela inauguration. 50 of us were there. We were there on Air Force 2. It was headed by Vice President Al Gore and Tipper. Hillary was there, but also John Lewis was there. And I was looking at that book and thinking about John Lewis and his great legacy and how he kept his word from something that I had something to do with there in that event. What we really were doing, we were refueling in Kinshasa, Zaire, the morning after the celebration event. We had gotten to a plane in Johannesburg and had taken off for Kinshasa, Zaire, on our way back home. And it was there in that yard that morning in front of Air Force Two, for those who hadn't finished breakfast already, that I remembered in a very special way. I remembered John Lewis, who vowed that he was going to keep a poem, and he was not only going to keep that I had written. I haven't written many poems in my life, but I had written one that night on my way from the inauguration. What really had happened, I had taken a bag, a throw-up bag, and it written. That was the only thing I could find with enough space to put a paper on, put a poem on, and had gone to the restroom. And when I came back, after writing this poem, I found that Jesse Jackson and some other friends who were part of the 50 who were representing the United States of America at the inauguration, that they had gotten my poem, and Maya Angelou was reading it in the center of the plane, and all of the things that had impressed me so very much the day before was summed up in what the words I put in that poem. And I wrote on page 177 that particular poem, Flying Home, from that inauguration. And I'll share that poem with everybody in a moment right now. I had been so greatly impressed with the attitude of the people in the neighborhood section, the top neighborhood section of that city, where they were saying, "Nelson, you will free us as well, and we are glad to have you as our president." When I realized that Nelson Mandela had honored the man who showed him decency and kindness in jail and was paying a very great tribute to this jailer of the Nationalist Party in the terrible days of apartheid in Southern Africa, Nelson Mandela had taken it upon himself to honor this man. And one of the things that impressed me so very much. Another thing was that flyover, those jet black pilots, and the flyover that saluted the new president of South Africa, and how they did things that nobody had ever seen in the air at that time, when they were celebrating the fact that for miles those South Africans, under the leadership of the ANC, they had stood in the hot sunshine like this, hotter than it is today. And I thank God for these breezes that we're getting now, a few of them. How this man had the great majesty to turn his appreciation toward a man who was of the racial group that had given so much pain to black people in South Africa on the first day of his inauguration as president of the country, and many other things that had been so impressive. And this is what I wrote on the back of that throw-up bag, and what Maya Angelou was reading, and what the people who own this plane, who are pictured on page 176. the Honorable Ernie Green of the Little Rock Nine, Senate Paul Simon, Secretary Ron Brown, General Colin Powell, of course Bishop F.C. James, Honorable Jesse Jackson, former Governor Lowell Weicker of New England, Congresswoman Maxine Rivers, Ambassador William Gray, Congressman John Lewis, superstar Quincy Jones. But this is what we wrote. Indelible images of South Africa's liberation, of the triumph of political righteousness in our time, and before our eyes, and in our ears, and in our hearts, and in our spirits, of Nelson Mandela, the soaring symbol, the shining sun, S-O-N, the prepared persona, the people's preference, the able advocate, the ANC angel, the magnificent manifestation, the momentous man. Dignity beyond dimension, courage beyond contention, readiness to rule, smarts not learned in school, support from strange sources, facilitated from foreign forces, tears of joy and gladness dilute earlier thoughts of sadness. Victory yell singing from poorly housed peoples, church bells ringing from holy house steeples. A moment in time with justice highfalutin, when the leaders of the earth came bowing and saluting. Great South Africa at last is free. Now, the American delegation sent by the Clinton administration, led by Vice President and Mrs. Gore, First Lady Hillary, and many more, step aboard that star-striped steel bird. Let the mighty jet engines under her wings be heard. Lift her eagle-crested cabin toward the salutary sky. South Africa, we are leaving, but we do not say goodbye. Yours truly, Frederick Calhoun James. What John Lewis said in the middle of that plane that night, he said, I not only salute this man, this bishop on this poem that Angelo is reading, he said, but I'm going to present this to the House of Representatives of the United States of America. He said, when I get back home. And he kept that promise. He did that. And on page 19 in the same book, the Honorable Fritz Hollins, on page 19, carried that salutation out with his influence in the United States Senate. And it was a great day in which the wonderful Mr. John Lewis was a major part of that, and the rejoicing in my heart of what he did and how he did it, and the influence that he wielded, and the respect that he showed in the United States Congress, in the House of Representatives. That is what I wanted to share with you. Now, today we meet here in really remembrance of the wonderful President of the United States, when we could say that about the President of the United States, that he was wonderful, the wonderful Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964, upon the signing of the Civil Rights Bill. I too was fortunate enough to be a part of the one that took place the next year in 1965. I hope I said 1964. 1964 is the Civil Rights Bill. But 1965, the Voting Rights Bill, following the activity in Alabama, the awful activity that Lewis was a part of in the Pettus on Pettus Bridge. That morning, I was preaching at my church in Mount Pisgah AME Church in Sumter, South Carolina, because I did not believe in going somewhere else when I was supposed to be at my assignment. But I caught the first thing I could catch in the afternoon here in Columbia on my way to Alabama, and I got into Selma later that afternoon, joined the crowd, and we on our way to Montgomery, and we marched into Montgomery together. I at that time was Director of Social Action of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and moreover was very active in civil rights in the state of South Carolina, which I will share some of in closing with you here today. But Lyndon Baines Johnson, with his face flashing red, Texas red as a rose, summoned the first recipient of the first pen that with which he signed the Civil Rights Bill, 1964, in Washington, D.C. He said, Martin Luther King Jr., come forward. And the first one went to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He received the first bill with which the great President Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill. And the second signatory went to Mr. Roy Wilkins. First one went to Martin Luther King Jr. of SCLC's Southern Christian Leadership Congress. Second one went to Roy Wilkins of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The third one went to, he called Whitney Young of the National Urban League. And right on until he got to the 13th. But when he got to the 13th, he said, I'm calling the Reverend F.C. James, Director of Social Action of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and a citizen of South Carolina. And he gave to me that 13th pen with which he signed the voting rights bill. And as he did, he said, he repeated the words, we shall overcome. And although he was talking about a number of us who were people of color, but this man, when he said we, it was obvious he was talking about the best-hearted people of America from everywhere in the world. And he was saying, I think he could have used the word, instead of saying we shall overcome, he could say we have overcome. We have done something that we know is right in signing this civil rights bill. And that's the spirit in which Lyndon Baines Johnson stood tall and represented the great office that he holds, and gave reason to think greatly of the person who had the great honor of representing the majority of people of the state, of the country in which we all were born. So we shall overcome, and I think when we say he shall overcome, people of color in this country, we are really thinking of color to a large extent. And we really also took our heritage from this black spiritual that came from the cornfields and the cotton fields, and came from the cane savannas, and came from parts of this country, but landed really on the doorsteps of so many of our churches, of all denominations, the churches of America, when we said that we shall overcome. Because really, it's a chant, it's a song. Lyndon Baines Johnson did not sing a song. He gave a commitment. And I think he could have as easily said, we have overcome. And the ordinary following a request, what a thinking person would use when he thinks of that term, and that would be when. When we said it in our song, we sang we shall overcome, we said someday, and put our faith into action, that God would make the determination when we would overcome. But I believe he was saying, we have overcome. Under this president, we have done the right thing by all of the people in this country. And so that is the way it was. And we thank God for having been a part of that great experience. And now I want to share with you some civil rights leaders, if I can find them, some civil rights leaders in Sumter, South Carolina, that I went on back home after I got my 13th pen. I came on back home and joined the civil rights movement in the great state of South Carolina. And I just want to call some names of people who are no longer with us, and take advantage of this, and I hope I'm not staying out here too long. But I'm going to call these names if I can. Ministers who were leaders in the civil rights movement in South Carolina in the 1950s and the 1960s. along with yours truly. The Reverend J.P. Reeder from Columbia, the Reverend William McKinley Bowman of Columbia, the Reverend Ida Quincy Newman of Columbia, the Reverend H.P. Sharp of Sumter, the Reverend J. Herbert Nelson of Sumter, the Reverend Matthew McCullum of Orangeburg, the Reverend E. McKay Miller of Sumter, Reverend Chappell Davis of Orangeburg, Reverend B.J. Glover of Charleston, Reverend William Randolph of Sumter, Reverend Ralph Canty of Sumter, Reverend Henry McGill of Sumter, Reverend I.H. Hinton of Columbia, Reverend J.A. Delane of Lake City, the Reverend J.W. Seals of Sumter, of Somerton, the Reverend E. Richburg of Somerton, the Reverend L.B. Burgess of Florence, the Reverend C. Jasper Smith of Sumter, the Reverend Omega Newman of Charleston, Reverend A.W. Wright of Sumter, Reverend R.W. Stallings of Sumter, the Reverend I.W. Walker. And believe it or not, in those days there were some white friends. There were some white friends who were part of our movement and were assistant oriented to what we were trying to accomplish. And they were Mr. Courtney Siselaw of Frogmore, head of the Penn Center of the American Friends Service Committee, Penn Center, in giving a place where Martin Luther King Jr. and his friends came to plan. The Reverend Mr. Senator John Land of Manning attended our NAACP meetings as though he was a member of them. The Reverend A. McKay Brabham of Columbia, Mrs. Rebecca Reed, the most feisty person you ever want to know as a young lady, and one not so young, Miss Ann Herbert of Sumter, Mr. John Kirby of Sumter, Miss Alice Spearman of Columbia, Mayor Lester Bates of Columbia, Mr. Rhett Jackson of Columbia, Reverend Howard McLean of Columbia, Reverend Fred Reese of Columbia, Mr. Julius Eldridge of Sumter, Miss Priscilla Shaw of Sumter, Mr. and Mrs. Marvin Trapp of Sumter, Mr. William Hodge of Sumter. And then there were these lay people, Attorney Lincoln Jenkins of Columbia, Mr. Robert Palmer of Sumter, Mr. Moses Jackson of Sumter, Miss Jessica Simpkins of Columbia, Mr. Billy Fleming of Manning, Mr. E.A. Blackman of Ellery, Mr. I.S. Levy, the grandfather of our own great I.S. Levy Johnson of Columbia, Mr. J.T. McCain of Sumter, Attorney Matthew Perry of Columbia, Attorney E.A. Finney of Sumter, Mr. Joe Brown of Charleston, Mr. Charles Byrd of Thoreau, Attorney Jessica Johnson of Florence, Mr. Esau Jenkins of Charleston, Mr. Frank Robinson of Core of Sumter, Sidney Vaughn of Sumter, Mr. John McCrae of Columbia, Mr. B.T. Williams of Sumter, Dr. E.C. Jones of Sumter, Mr. Earl Middleton of Orangeburg, Mr. Eugene Montgomery of Orangeburg, Mr. William Singleton of Sumter, Miss Sylvia Louise Loney of the Dalzell Catch-All community, Mr. Man Stanley of Darlington, South Carolina, Mr. James Solomon of Columbia, Mrs. Septima Clark of Charleston, Mr. Joseph Givens of Sumter, Mr. Tom Martin, also of this city of Columbia, Dr. Edmund McDonald of Sumter, Attorney Raymond Swartz of Sumter. And I think I might have read enough there, but I wanted you to know that these people are asleep today, but they were alive. They were not asleep in that day.
That's right.
And we kept up the fight, and we stood for the right, and we did what we had to do because of our commitment to civil rights. God be praised for what we did, and we thank God for the opportunity to having done so. To all of you, God bless you, and may God continue to let the fire burn brightly in the hearts of people who will be committed to the right thing. That is the thing that makes the difference. To know in your heart what is right and to do what you need to do.
Amen.
Thank God.
Amen.
And thank you one and all. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Bishop James, and congratulations. Now you know why he's most deserving of the Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank all of you for being here today. One of the young newscasters earlier said, well, when will this program be over? And I said, when Bishop James is done. We're now done. Thank you very much. To learn more about the South Carolina African American Heritage Commission, please visit the table here or its website to learn more about Bishop James. Please purchase one of his books entitled Forward in Faith. Thank all of you for being here this afternoon.